So today we are starting stitching our pants. So everyone please turn on your cameras just as a reminder. But last time that we were in class together, about a week and a half ago, we got all of our pattern pieces ready, cut out, interfaced, and serged. And now we're ready to actually start stitching on the pants. So today we're going to be doing both types of pockets. On the back of our pant, we'll have welt pockets. And then on the front of our pant, we have the slash pockets that have that diagonal opening. So I'm going to do one of each just to save time in class today, but you will do the exact same procedure for the other two pockets that I don't do, okay? And you'll need to do all 4 pockets before moving on to the steps that we'll do on Wednesday. So I'll switch over my camera and we'll go ahead and get started. Over here, I've got one of my back pant legs ready to go. So we're gonna do the welt pocket first. And again, I'm just doing one, but you'll do both before you move on. So for this, you're gonna need one of your back pant legs, one of your pocket facings. So that's the skinny, the more narrow rectangle, your pocket bag, which is that larger rectangle out of lining. And then this is the welt rectangle that we're going to use to create the little welts that meet in the middle of our pocket. So the first thing we're going to need is that welt, and we're going to put it right sides together, right in the middle of where those drill holes are going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my pattern so I can look at the drill holes. So for this one, this pant leg is the one that is face up whenever I cut it out. So I've got my drill holes right here on the front. Whenever I go to do my other pant leg, just like when we were cutting, you had to flip over that pattern piece. So on your other pant leg, when you go to do it, you need to make sure to flip it over and mark the drill holes from the back so that you have it in the correct placement for each pant leg. But for this one, we're going to do it right side up. So I'm going to put my pattern piece right on top of my fabric. And then right in the center of where those drill holes are is where I want my welt to be. And my welt is going to be face down on my fabric so that it's right sides together with my fabric. So I'm just going to kind of figure out placement of that. And if you're using your actual paper, you may be able to even see through it to see where to put your pattern. Okay, so once you've got that right in the center, then we're going to mark off our drill holes using our awl. So just punch right through those corners. Some of mine didn't seem to go off. Can't see them. There we go. Just double check this one. Okay, there we go. So once you've got your drill holes on there, then you're ready to grab your marking utensil and your ruler so that you can connect those dots. And I'm going to zoom in so y'all can see more of what's happening on this next part. Okay, so I'm going to use my ruler to connect those dots. And I need to make sure that I am using a marking tool with a very fine tip so that I get a really nice precise line. Remember, with our welt pockets, precision is the most important thing. And those should be 1/2 inch apart, just like they were for our sample. So I'm going to use my ruler to get those exactly 1/2 inch apart, and then I can connect the ends right where the dots are to create that completed rectangle. Okay, the next thing we need to mark is that center line. So 1/4 inch in from the edge, I'm going to mark right down the center. We'll cut down that line later. So again, make sure that it's marked really well. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do is mark our little triangles on either end. So I'm going to go in 1/2 inch from the end, put a little mark on that center line, And from that center out to the corners, we're going to do a diagonal to create a little triangle at the end. And another name for that triangle is the dovetail. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, if you can make sure that you stay muted, unless you have a question, just make sure you stay muted so that the camera doesn't bounce back and forth between my camera and somebody else. Okay, the next thing we need to do is stitch those long sides of the rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my pins. Okay, and I'm just going to place some pins on either side so we can go and stitch that on our machine. Okay, let's go stitch this on our machine. Okay, on my machine, right now I've got it set at a 2.5. I'm gonna go ahead and make it lower on the stitch length so that I have a little bit more control. So if you remember from the sample that we did, it's extremely important on this step to start exactly at the corner and to end exactly at the other corner. So the smaller my stitch length is, the more control I'm going to have over how many stitches I take until I get to that corner. So I'm going to go down to a 1.5 to start with. If I need to lower it even more down to a 1 later on, I can. So right here, I'm going to put my needle down first, directly in that corner, so I know where I'm starting. Then I can put my foot down and start stitching. And again, when we do our back stitch, so I just did 2 stitches forward, and then I'm going to do 2 stitches back. If you need to do, oh, see, I went 1 too far. I'm going to have to seam rip that one. Let's see if I can get it out without. Ooh, there we go. I was able to twist my wheel backwards away from me, and it actually took out that stitch. So good. I went 1 too far. So that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to not go too far backwards past our corner when we're back stitching. Okay. Now follow your line all the way to the other side. And again, this is why it's good to have a fine tip marking tool, because the more precise your line is, the easier it's going to be to follow on the machine. Okay, all the way to the corner. I'm near the corner right now. If I need to go down even further in my stitch length to make sure that I end directly on that corner, I can. There we go. Okay, so that's my first line. Now I'm going to do the same with the other line. I'm going to go back up to a 1.5 to get started. Needle down first. And then we just follow my line. Now I'm going to go down to a 1 so I can control it and make sure I go right to that corner. There are my 2 finished lines. Both of those ends start, or both of the end of those lines are right at the same point on either side. Okay, let's head over to our ironing board. The next part of this is double checking before we cut. So double check on the backhand side. It's typically easier to see what's going on from the back because you don't have your markings interfering. But from the back, you want to double check again that those lines are the exact same length and that they are parallel, 1/2 inch apart. If they don't look parallel right here, now is the time to fix it because you won't be able to go fix it later. Okay, trim up your little threads to clean it up. And then from the front, we're going to cut down that center line. Okay, so I usually pinch mine or fold it in half right at the center. So I take a little pinch so that I'm folding that down that center line. And then take a little snip out of that center line so you can start a hole and then work your way out to the triangle. Whenever you get to the tip of the triangle, you're going to cut diagonally out to your corner. And you want to cut directly to where those stitches start. Okay, and it's important to use a sharp cutting sharp shears, so that you get a really nice clean corner and you're not trying to kind of hack at it to cut through your fabric. So precise cuts out to those corners. Okay. Our next step is to flip all of this through the hole. Let me get this situated. Okay, so we're going to take all of that Welt fabric and we're going to push it through the hole to send it to the other side of our fabric. So you should have a rectangular hole in your pants right now. Okay, on the backhand side, we need to press those long seams that we just stitched. So underneath your Welt fabric, this is what it's looking like on the back. You should be able to see those seam allowances right here that you stitched. So we're going to press that. Now with your wool, one good thing is to have steam. If you remember, wool is a little bit more challenging to press because it doesn't like to keep the creases that we tried to press into it. So if your iron has a steam function, I would definitely recommend using it. Otherwise, you can get just a spray bottle. So this is just like an all-purpose spray bottle that I got from Walmart. And I actually prefer this. My iron has a steam function, but I prefer the spray bottle because my iron tends to kind of like sputter and drip water when I don't want it to drip water. So I just like the spray bottle because it gives me a little bit more control. And you want it to be able to mist. So this one has a nozzle that I can twist. And if I twist it tighter, it will do a stream. And if I twist it looser, it'll do a mist. And I want to use the mist. I'm going to give it a little mist. And then I'm going to bust open that seam and press it. Now you, if you remember what I told you, you will need to let it cool down in that flat position. So a couple ways that you can do that is to put something on top of it and let it hold it down in that position. Another way, if you want it to cool down faster so that you can go through this process a little bit more efficiently, I've used my blow dryer before with the cool air, and I'll bring my blow dryer over here and I'll just blow some cold air on there to help it cool down a little bit faster. So you can use that as a trick if you need to. But we want that really nice crease in there before we move on. And you want your fabric to completely cool down before you move it, because if you move it while it's warm, then that crease that you just tried to press in there is still malleable and it will come out. Okay. So let it cool down, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm just going to flip this upside down so I can get to that seam allowance that's on this other side. We'll do the same thing. Quick squirt. and then press that. Okay, now we're going to, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see a little bit more of what's going on. But now we're going to start forming those welts that will fill in the center of our pocket. So if you remember that seam allowance that's sticking towards your welt, we're going to use that top raw edge of it and fold right where that raw edge is so that it wraps around that top seam allowance. We're going to press a crease into that. I'm going to give it a squirt and press it one more time using that steam. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. So again, I'm going to flip it. Fold right on that raw edge of the seam allowance. And your welts should meet right in the center of your pocket. They should not overlap and they should not gap away from each other. Again, I'm going to spray it just to get a little bit more steam. And then we need to check those from the front side before we move on so that we can check and make sure those welts are forming into the shape that we want. So each welt should be 1/4 inch wide. They should be even and meet right in the middle. Your corners should not look like they're tucked. So check your corners. A little bit of my triangle is kind of folding into my pocket. So I'm just pushing it back out here so it doesn't interfere with my pocket shape. I'm going to hold that down for a second so it doesn't move on me. And then just double check the width of your welts. They should, again, both be 1/4 inch wide. They should look even. One should not be bigger than the other. And your corners should not be tucked. So I'm fixing, one of my welts was a little bit too wide on this end. So fixing that and then repressing. When you're pressing from the front, I would absolutely recommend using a press cloth because you don't want the indentions of those seam allowances to show through your fabric. So if you've ever left an iron on a piece of fabric for a little bit too long and it's created that like outline of an iron, that is what we're trying to avoid. So I'm going to spray it first so I have that steam in there, and then I'm going to put my press cloth on top. Just make sure that I don't get the imprint of an iron or the imprint of my seam allowances on my fabric. Okay, so those two corners are pretty good. Now I just need to fix the ones that I have pinned over here. So again, quick spray. And then use that press cloth to prevent burning your fabric, prevent staining it, and to prevent getting those impressions. And if you have the steam on your iron that you're using, you don't have to spray it ahead of time. Just while you're pressing it, you can go ahead and push that steam button and it will steam up your fabric as you go. Okay, so I've got a pretty good shape here. Gravity is kind of pulling it apart, which is why I've got that gap, but whenever I don't have gravity pulling on it, it should be good. And then now I'm going to stitch those little ends, the short ends of my pocket. So from here, I need to just fold back that top layer of fabric. So just my pant layer, and I should reveal my two little dovetails with my Welt fabric sitting behind it. I'm going to pin through those dovetails. And you should be able to see your chalk. Mine kind of rubbed off, so I'll redraw it right here. But you should be able to see your chalk line and your pressed crease, and that's exactly where we're going to stitch. So I'm going to pin both sides before we move it. Okay, now we're going to go to our machine and stitch both of those little dovetails. Coming over here, I'm just going to put that dovetail right under my foot. Again, I'm stitching right in this crease line, or you may still be able to see your chalk there if yours hasn't rubbed off. And then I'm going to push my stitch length back up to a regular 2.5, or you can leave it at 1.5 if you want that smaller stitch for this part. But the most important part on this is that we do not stitch the folded part of our fabric. We only stitch on the part that's sticking off that triangle. So I'm going to start right at the corner of the triangle. Okay, so there's one stitched dovetail. You can see my stitches in there. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, and there's my other one stitched. Just double checking from the front side that I didn't get the fold. So you shouldn't have any tucks on your corners. If whenever you open this up and you fold it back, if your corner looks tucked and it's not laying flat, then you accidentally caught the fold of the fabric. So make sure that you don't have those, and then you should be good to go. Okay, so now let's head back and we're gonna pin and stitch another portion of this. Like I said, from the machine, you wanna make sure, or when I was at the machine, I was talking about this, you want to make sure that those corners are not tucked. So double check those now, because if you need to fix anything, again, you have to do it before you move on. I'm gonna go ahead and give mine a little mist and repress those corners to make sure that they're looking how I want them before I move on. Okay, they're looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. The next thing we're going to do is close up those welts. So just like we did on our sample, we're going to take just the pant fabric and fold it back, and that should reveal the seam allowance and then the welt fabric sitting right behind it. So we're going to re-stitch those because right now we can open it up and we can see inside that welt, and we don't want to be able to do that. So I'm going to lay this flat and get it the right shape. And then fold back just that top fabric. Okay, now we're going to go stitch right on top of that same stitch line that's visible, where we stitched the long side of our rectangle. And we're going to do that just to secure this seam allowance down to the welt so that it can't be opened. Okay, so right on the back stitch where that seam ended, so you can see my back stitch right here, I'm going to start there again. My stitch length is now up to a 2.5. So if you had it shortened before, you can go ahead and push it back up. Put my needle down first so that I know exactly where I'm starting. And then on this one, if you remember from our sample, if you get off of that line, it's better to go over to the side where the welt is than it is to go to the side where the pant fabric is. Because if you go towards the side where the pant fabric is, you're going to be changing the shape of your pocket.
Oops. Class started at 1.
Okay, so if you can please make sure you're muted so the camera does not bounce back and forth.
No, I just got it on. That's okay. You get 2 absences. And she records class, so.
Okay. Where was I? I was on my back stitch. Okay, so we did that top welt. Now we need to do the same process on the bottom welt. So I'm going to zoom out for a second. Flip up that top fabric so you're looking at the front of your pocket again. And then just like we did on that top welt, we're going to do the same thing on that bottom welt where I just get the pant out of the way. I'm going to flip it up out of the way, and I should be able to see my seam allowance and my welt sticking down at the bottom. So I'm going to turn this upside down so it's easier to pin. There we go. And now I'm going to pin through those 2 layers and stitch it just like I did the other one. Looks like my thread came out of my needle. Let me fix that before I move on. Okay, now, just like we did before, start right at the back stitch on top of the same line that we did before. And if you get off the line, it's better to go over towards the side of the welt than it is towards the side of the pant. Okay, once you get that done, you can double check from the front side. Situate myself. Okay, so double check from the front side. Your welts should still look the same size. Nothing should have changed. And from the back, you should be able to see all 4 sides of your rectangle stitched. So now we're gonna go clean this up and then we'll start putting on our pocket bag. So trim all of those little threads that you have hanging off. Okay. And now from the front, if you want to do one last press of your welts and your pocket shape, just to make sure that it's really in the shape that you need it before you move on, that would be a good idea. So I'm just going to give mine a little mist and then repress it again with my press cloth so I don't end up with those impressions. The next thing we're going to do is our pocket bag. So you need to grab your pocket lining, that pocket bag pattern piece that was cut out of lining, and then our facing. So I'm going to set this aside for a second so we can get those two things put together. Okay, so here's my pocket bag out of lining and my pocket facing, which is that narrow rectangle. Now, one thing I noticed was I forgot to put the notches on the lining piece. So we're going to go ahead and put those on ourselves right now. So if you line up your facing with the very top of that pocket bag, there are notches on your facing right here, 1/4 inch from the bottom. And so I just want you to take, while it's laying there, take your shears and go ahead and recut those notches. So you can see there's a notch right here. Wherever that hits, I'm going to cut that on my lining piece. That was just an oversight on my part. I forgot to add those little notches. So right through here, through that notch, I'm going to cut through my lining so I transfer that notch over. Okay, and you can do that on both sides. And now we're going to stitch those together, matching up that notch, but we want to flip our facing down so it's right sides together with the lining. Match up those notches because after we stitch it, we're going to flip it up just like we had it. So match those up. Pin across the top of the facing. And that notch that we just transferred off tells us that we're going to stitch 1/4 inch down from the edge of the facing. Okay, so let's go stitch that on our machine. Okay, so using the edge of that facing as my guide, line it up with that 1/4 inch marking on my foot. And then we're just going to do a permanent stitch across the top of that facing. So there's my stitch line. Now let's go press this on our ironing board and we'll get ready to put this on our pocket. So trim off any threads that you have hanging, and then we're going to flip that facing up to cover up that gap. Press a nice crease into the bottom. So you can see I'm pulling this apart and separating those layers as I go. At this point, you are pressing your lining. So if your lining is polyester or a man-made fiber, you need to make sure to turn down the heat on your iron so that you don't melt it, okay? Okay, once you've got that crease in there, then we're ready to start putting this on our pant leg. So I'm gonna zoom out some so we can see more of what's happening. Okay, and grab your pant leg. We're gonna look at the back where we can see that welt fabric. And now, just like on our sample, the bottom of this pocket bag is going to get attached to the bottom of our welt, which is right here. So I'm gonna lay this face down on the back of my pant leg, match up the bottom of the lining with the bottom of that welt. And we're just gonna grab those two off by themselves so everything else is out of the way. And we're gonna pin that line and stitch it at 1/2 inch. And then we'll come back and stitch the other 3 sides of the pocket bag in a minute. So just pinning through lining and welt piece, not through any of my pocket or any of my pant leg. Okay, coming over here, stitch that at 1/2 inch across the bottom of the pocket bag. Okay, let's go back over and we will fold our pocket bag and stitch those other 3 sides. From here, I'm going to look at the back of my pant leg. I should have my pocket bag sticking up. I'm going to fold that down. So I'm looking at the right side of the lining fabric. And I'm going to press this crease here where we just stitched. Got some threads to clean up here. Okay, and then we're going to fold that pocket bag back up. So we've got it hanging down here. Just grab that facing and put it up to the top of the welt. So it should be face down on top of your welt. And then you're pinning through those 3 layers. So you have your lining layer, your facing layer, and your welt layer. I am not going to pin through the actual pant leg. So just pin through those 3 layers across the top. Okay, and then same thing on the 2 sides. We don't want to pin through our pant layer. We just want to pin through the pocket bag. And we want this to lay nice and flat. So just let yours lay flat and crease that bottom. So right here is our folded edge. That's going to be a crease. And if the edges of your pocket bag don't match perfectly, do not force it to match as long as it's less than 1/2 inch difference. If it's 1/2 inch or more, then we need to fix something before we move on. But if it's less than 1/2 inch difference, don't try and pull it over, because you'll see when I pull it over, it makes that pocket bag start to pop up and it won't lay flat inside your garment. So don't force it. And if it's a significant difference, more than 1/2 inch, then you will need to fix before you move on. Okay, so there's one side pinned. Other side pinned. And now I need to just get my pant fabric out of the way so we can stitch those 3 layers. So I'm going to flip over to the front. And then just like we did on our sample, I'm just going to fold that top pant layer out of the way. So kind of just fold it in on itself so that I can see the edges of my pocket bag. I'm going to throw a pin right here in the middle just to hold all of that together. Okay, so let's go stitch these 3 edges at 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to pick a corner to start at and then work my way around. So you can see here where my edges are slightly off. I did not force those to meet because I want my pocket bag to stay laying flat. This is one of the few times where you don't force your edges to meet. Okay, when you get to the corner, you're going to leave your needle down, pick up your foot, and pivot. Okay, so there is our finished pocket bag. The last step we need to do is to serge those 3 edges that we just stitched. But we're also going to do our slash pocket today, and that one will need serging. So I'm going to set this aside and just save it for whenever I serge the other one, so I can just serge them both at the same time, and I don't have to bounce back and forth between machines. So these are the types of things they do in the industry often, where they stitch as much as they can before they go back to the iron, or they stitch as much as they can here before they have to serge. That way they are having to transfer less. So we'll save that to the side. If I was doing this on my real pants, I would stitch both welt pockets to this point, get them ready to serge, and then set them aside while I do my slash pockets, okay? So now let's start one of our slash pockets. For our slash pocket, we're going to need our front pant leg and our 2 pocket pieces. So I've got my pocket facing that we cut out of the lining fabric, and then my pocket bag that we cut out of the wool fabric. So I'm going to get my front one out first. And I'm looking at the right side of my fabric, at the front of my fabric. And I'm going to put that right sides together with the lining and match up that curve. And then whenever you're picking out your pocket bag, you'll know that you have the correct one, whether it's left or right. If your pocket bag, when you put it underneath, it fills out that corner, and you're looking at the right side of the fabric on both of them. So if I had this filling out the corner, but I was looking at the wrong side of the fabric, then it would be the opposite pocket, okay? So make sure that whenever it fills out that corner, that you've got the right side of the fabric facing up on both. Okay, we'll set that aside for a second and just get our lining right sides together on that curve. We're gonna pin it and stitch it at 1/4 inch. And we know it's 1/4 inch because we have a notch right up here at the waist corner that tells us what that seam allowance is. Okay, let's go stitch that at 1/4 inch. Okay, so pick a corner. Sorry, I bumped the camera. But pick a corner. Doesn't really matter which one you're starting at, but you're going to start at one corner of that diagonal curve and work your way to the other. Okay, so there's that stitch right on the curve at 1/4 inch. Let's head back to our ironing board. So now I'm going to separate those two layers so we can bust open that seam. Can trim up my threads before I move on. There we go. And then bust open that seam. Okay, and then we're going to trim that lining seam allowance in half to reduce the bulk. Okay, and then we're treating this like a facing. So we need to put both of our seam allowances over towards the facing side and understitch them so they stay folded. So I'm gonna press this wool seam allowance over towards the lining. And then we're going to take that to our machine and we're going to understitch those seam allowances down so they stay folded over. So an understitch should happen as close to that original seam line as possible. So right next to it, on top of those seam allowances, I'm going to stitch them down. Okay, so that is my stitch line right there. Okay, let's go back to our ironing board again. The next thing we're ready for is putting on our other pocket piece. So I'm going to look at the front of my fabric. Take off my extra threads. And then I'm going to grab my wool pocket piece and put it face down. So right sides together with the lining, but put it face down right on top of that. And then I'm going to pin just along the curved side of my pocket. And for this one, we have a notch here up at the top that tells us this is going to be a 1/2 inch stitch line. Just matching up these corners and the curve. You can pin from either side, really, from the lining side or from the wool side, whatever makes you more comfortable. Okay, now we're going to go stitch it again, just on that curve that we just pinned. Okay, back over here. I'm just going to line up that top corner with my 1/2 inch marking on my machine. And we'll stitch all the way around that curved edge of the pocket bag. Excuse me. Something's getting stuck or clogged in my machine. Oh no. I'm gonna have to do a little quick repair. Hold on. Okay. I'm gonna back stitch right over that spot where it stopped so that I can finish this out. And this is a seam that's gonna be hidden on the inside of our pants, so that's why it's okay for me to do that. If it was a stitch that was going to be visible on the outside of our pants, we definitely would want to redo that whole stitch line. So I'd have to, if I made a mistake like that in the middle, I'd have to seam rip the whole thing and go back and fix it. It's so weird. There we go, got it up. Okay, so that is my pocket bag. Let's head back over to our ironing board and we'll talk about finishing this up. So we've got that pocket bag stitched. You need to clean up any threads that are hanging off. And then the next thing that we're going to do is go serge it before we fold it back to the inside of our pant, because right now it's sticking off the edge. So with it sticking off the edge, just like this, we just did that curved stitch. Around that exact same path, we're going to serge these 2 layers. And then we're also going to serge our welt pocket while we're over there. So let's head over to our serger and we will serge both of these pockets. But now it's up and ready. So again, on this slash pocket bag, I'm going to serge around the curve. And I don't want to cut anything off. So there is my fully serged pocket bag for that one. Again, my pant fabric was out of the way that entire time, only serging through the pocket layers. I'm going to grab my welt pocket. I still have those pant pieces folded out of the way, so I should just have those raw edges sticking off. And I'm going to serge those 3 edges. So finishing these up, our welt pocket should be completely done except for cleaning and pressing. So trim off those serger tails, any other threads that may be hanging off, you want to clean up at this point. So if you had any frayed edges that were visible, and that didn't get covered with the serger. You can trim those. And now I can unpin those pocket or the pant leg area. And now I've got my pocket from the front. I've got the welts with the pocket bag inside there. And then from the back, you should be able to see your square pocket bag hanging out. Okay, so all of that will be visible on the inside of your pants. So make sure you do both of those before our next class, because we'll need to do that before we move on. Okay, to finish up your slash pocket, we have 2 steps left. The first one is pressing and cleaning. So I'm going to clean up those serger tails and any threads that are hanging off. And then we need to press this right on that pocket opening. So right now, again, it's still sticking off. Right where that pocket opening is, that diagonal that we stitched at the very beginning, we're going to fold right on that seam. And your pocket pieces should stack up to fill out that corner that we were missing. So I'm going to press this curve right on the seam. Get this to lay flat. My pocket underneath is not in the right position. There we go. Wasn't wanting to lay flat. Okay, so that opening, press it right on the seam so that the seam is right on your crease, your fold line. And then that will allow your pocket pieces to stack up and to fill out that corner. So here, whenever I start to pick this up, you'll see how it starts to fall apart because we haven't basted the edges where those stack up. So let them stack up and lay nice and flat. We're going to pin it up here. There is a notch on your waistline. So you may be able to see that notch right there that shows you exactly where the edge of your pocket should hit. So the edge of that serging should come right to that notch. I'm going to pin through all of those layers at the waistline. There's 3 of them, your pant, your lining, and then your wool part of your pocket. And then I'm going to pin through all 3 layers over here at the side seam. Okay, so from the outside, you should have that nice crease on your opening. And then from the inside, all 3 pocket layers should lay nice and flat on the inside of your pant. So we're going to go baste over those little sections where they overlap so that everything stays put together so that we can sew our other seams later on. So let's go baste. Okay, so now again, over that waistline and over that side seam, we're just going to baste at 1/2 inch. So this is my waistline right here. This is my pocket opening, and I'm going to go from that opening to where my notch is. And you can probably see the notch better right here. At 1/2 inch, because that will be the seam allowance that we need whenever we put on our waistband. So push up your stitch length to a 4. Do not back stitch. We'll just stitch over that area. And then same for the side seam. And it's really holding on to my thread right now. Something's going on. And here's my side seam area. Okay, so there is my finished slash pocket. Waistline, see if that'll adjust, there we go, waistline and side seam, both basted over those 3 layers so that they stay closed.